The bar smelled like a mixture of chemical cleaning agents and alien sweat. Not the worst place Sarah Chun had been in her career, but definitely not pleasant either. She sat alone at a corner table, her fingers wrapped around a glass of something that passed for whiskey on this side of the galaxy around her. The noise of Epsilon 7's most notorious spaceport bar filled the air. Voices in a dozen different languages, the clatter of drinks being served, the occasional burst of laughter or argument. Sarah looked every bit the part she was playing, a tired human freight hauler, worn down by too many cargo runs and not enough sleep. Her clothes were practical and dirty, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face showing the kind of exhaustion that came from weeks of long shifts. No one looking at her would guess what she really was. That was exactly the point. The bar catered to all species. Though humans were definitely in the minority here, most of the patrons were larger, stronger species who saw humans as the newcomers to the coalition, weak little primates who had somehow talked their way into galactic society. Sarah had heard it all before. She had learned to let the insults slide off her back like water 3 tables away. A group of Draxian soldiers were getting louder with each round of drinks. Draxians were impressive to look at, 8 feet tall, covered in thick scales that could stop a knife blade, muscles that could bend steel bars. They were one of the coalition's most feared warrior races, and they knew it. The leader of the group was particularly large. Even for a Draxian, his scales were a deep crimson color, marked with the scars of many battles. He wore the insignia of a mid-ranking soldier, and his squadmates clearly deferred to him. Sarah had been watching him for the past hour, noting his increasing intoxication, the way his movements became more aggressive, how his voice grew louder. She recognized the type of bully who used his size and species as an excuse to dominate others. The Draxian's eyes had been drifting toward her table more frequently in the last 20 minutes. Sarah kept her body language small and non-threatening, playing the role of someone who just wanted to drink alone and avoid trouble. But she was mapping the room in her mind. 3 exits, 2 of them clear, 1 blocked by debris. 14 patrons total, 5 of them Draxian soldiers, 9 others of various species. The bartender was a Zentari, a 4-armed species known for staying neutral in fights. 2 security cameras, both with blind spots. She had already identified old habits died hard. The large Draxian stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across half the bar. His squadmates laughed and made comments in their growling language, comments that needed no translation. Based on their tone, Sarah watched him approach from the corner of her eye, her grip on her glass remaining relaxed. "Human female," the Draxian said, his voice thick with alcohol and an accent that mangled the coalition common language. "You sit alone? Why?" Sarah looked up at him with what she hoped was the right mixture of wariness and politeness. "Just having a drink after a long haul," she said, her voice quiet and unremarkable. "Not looking for company." The Draxian's lip curled back, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Draxian warrior offers company. Humans should be honored," he said, moving closer. "I am Kruvax, slayer of enemies, crusher of resistance forces." Sarah could smell the alcohol on his breath now, mixed with something that was distinctly reptilian. "I appreciate the offer," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "But I really just want to finish my drink and head back to my ship." Kruvax's eyes narrowed, and Sarah saw the shift in his body language. The offer had become a demand in his mind. "Human females are weak," he said, reaching out toward her. "Need strong male to protect. Draxian males are strongest." His hand, each finger as thick as her wrist, clamped down on her forearm. The grip was immense, designed to intimidate, to make her understand how helpless she was against his strength. For a normal human civilian, the pressure would have been agonizing. Bones would crack under that kind of force. Sarah felt the pressure and calculated the exact angle of his thumb placement. The distribution of force, the vulnerable points in his wrist and elbow, but instead of fighting back, she let fear show on her face. "Please," she said, her voice taking on a tremor. "You're hurting me, let go." Kruvak's friends laughed from their table. Enjoying the show, the bartender looked uncomfortable, but made no move to intervene. Humans were low on the station's social hierarchy, and Draxian soldiers were not the kind of customers you wanted to anger. "Come with Kruvak's," the soldier said, pulling her up from her chair with casual strength. "We go to back room. I show you how Draxian treats females. You will beg for more." His squad mates howled with laughter. Other patrons looked away. Unwilling to get involved, Sarah stumbled as he pulled her, playing the terrified victim, her free hand bracing against his chest, as if trying to push him away. But her eyes had gone cold and distant, running calculations that would have terrified anyone who knew what they meant. "Please stop," she said again, louder now, making sure others could hear, establishing the record of what was happening. "I don't want this. You need to let me go." Kruvak ignored her, dragging her toward the back hallway where the bar's private rooms were located. His grip shifted, moving to her upper arm, squeezing harder, demonstrating his dominance. The other patrons watched in silence, some uncomfortable, some indifferent. None willing to challenge a Draxian warrior over a lone human female. Sarah let herself be pulled forward 3 more steps, memorizing Kruvak's movement patterns, the way his balance shifted, the exact rhythm of his breathing. Then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, something changed in her expression. The fear vanished, replaced by something cold and professional. Her body, which had seemed small and helpless a moment ago, suddenly moved with deadly precision. Kruvak was still laughing, still expecting easy conquest. When Sarah's entire demeanor transformed from victim to predator, the bar's din seemed to fade as every eye turned toward them, sensing that something was about to happen, something that would shatter every assumption in the room about humans, about strength, about what it meant to be a warrior in this galaxy. Sarah looked up at Kruvak, and for the first time, he saw what lurked behind the civilian disguise. For the first time, he felt something he rarely experienced: fear. Sarah's movement was so fast that most of the bar's patrons missed it entirely. One moment she was being dragged toward the back rooms by Kruvak. The next moment her free hand had struck a point just below his jaw, a spot where Draxian neural clusters converged. Information known only to specialists who had studied their anatomy in detail. Kruvak's grip loosened instantly as his nervous system misfired, before he could process what was happening. Sarah had rotated her captured arm in a precise spiral motion that exploited the natural weakness in Draxian joint structure. Breaking his hold completely, she didn't stop there. 2 more strikes, each one targeting pressure points that would drop a Draxian warrior without causing permanent damage behind the knee joint where their thick scales were thinnest, and a nerve cluster near the base of the spine that caused temporary paralysis. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. Kruvak, the 8-foot warrior who moments ago had been demonstrating his dominance, collapsed forward onto his hands and knees, gasping for breath. His body refusing to obey his command. Sarah stepped back, her stance now unmistakably military, balanced, ready, positioned so that she could see both Kruvak and his approaching squad mates. Simultaneously, the bar had gone completely silent. Every patron was staring at the impossible scene before them. A human woman, barely 5.5 feet tall, standing calmly over a disabled Draxian soldier. The other 4 Draxians at the table had frozen mid-motion, their alcohol-fogged brains struggling to process what their eyes were telling them. Then training overcame shock, and they moved as a unit towards Sarah, their scales bristling with aggression. Sarah didn't retreat. She shifted her weight slightly, her hands coming up in a ready position that wasn't Quite a fighting stance, but wasn't defensive either. It was the posture of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of and wasn't afraid to demonstrate it. "Stop right there," she said. Her voice completely different now, no longer soft or frightened, but carrying the kind of command that made even the drunk Draxians hesitate. "Your friend made a mistake. He put his hands on me without consent. He threatened me. He attempted to drag me against my will to a secondary location." Her words were precise, establishing the legal framework, making sure every witness understood this was self-defense. "Now he's learning that humans aren't as weak as you all seem to think," she continued, her eyes moving from one Draxian to another, reading their intentions. "You can walk away right now, or you can join him on the floor, your choice." The largest of the remaining Draxians, his scales a darker shade of red than Kruvak's, snarled in anger. "Human struck coalition soldier," he growled. "This is crime. You die for this insult." He charged forward with the kind of berserker rage that Draxians were famous for. Expecting his mass and momentum to crush the small human, Sarah waited until the last possible moment, then moved aside with minimal effort, her hands shooting out to guide his trajectory into a nearby table. The Draxian crashed through the furniture with a sound like breaking stone. The bartender finally reacted, all four of his arms reaching under the counter. "Enough," he shouted in the Centauri clicking language, which the bar's translation system immediately converted to Coalition Common. "Security has been called. Everyone stays where they are." The other three Draxians looked between their two fallen comrades and the small human woman, who had just demonstrated combat skills far beyond what any civilian should possess. They were drunk, but not stupid enough to press the attack now that they understood they were facing someone with actual training. Sarah remained in position, her breathing steady, her eyes constantly moving to track threats. She was running through scenarios in her head. If security arrived and recognized her, her 6 months of deep cover work would be compromised if they took her in for questioning. Someone might run her biometrics through military databases, but she couldn't have let Kruvaks drag her into that back room. Some things were more important than mission. Security, the bar's main entrance, crashed open, and 4 station security officers rushed in, their NG weapons drawn. They were led by a Centauri officer whose uniform identified him as a squad leader, followed by 3 others of mixed species. "What is happening here?" the Centauri demanded, his translator making his clicking speech into harsh Coalition Common. Everyone started talking at once, the Draxians claiming assault, other patrons describing what they had seen. The bartender, trying to explain, the security leader raised 2 of his 4 hands for silence. His eyes moved from the 2 disabled Draxians to Sarah, who had carefully shifted back into a less threatening posture, though her readiness was still visible to anyone with training. "You," the Centauri said, pointing at Sarah with one hand while keeping his weapon trained on her with another. "What is your name and identification?" "Sarah Chun," she said calmly, reaching slowly into her jacket pocket. "Freight hauler, registered with the Stellar Transport Guild. My ID chip is in my pocket. I'm reaching for it now." She moved deliberately, making sure the security officers could see her hands at all times, pulling out a small identification card that contained her civilian cover identity. The Centauri officer scanned it with a handheld device, while his subordinates kept their weapons ready behind them. Kruvaks was starting to recover, his nervous system slowly rebooting. He climbed to his feet with obvious difficulty, his face twisted with humiliation and rage. "She attacked me," he snarled, pointing at Sarah with one clawed hand. "Unprovoked assault on Coalition soldier. She must be arrested, charged with assault, imprisoned." Several of the bar's patrons immediately objected, their voices overlapping as they described what had actually happened, how Kruvaks had grabbed Sarah first, how he had tried to force her to leave with him, how she had only defended herself. The Centauri officer's expression was hard to read behind his insectoid features, but his body language suggested he was deeply annoyed by the situation. "Multiple witnesses confirmed that you initiated physical contact," he said to Kruvax, his tone formal and cold. "They state you grabbed this female against her will and attempted to remove her from the public area. She is human." Kruvax spat, as if this explained everything. Weak species. New to Coalition, she should be honored by Draxian attention, not resist. The security officer's antennae twitched in what Sarah recognized as the Centauri equivalent of rolling one's eyes. "Your cultural attitudes are not relevant to Coalition law," the officer said, then turned back to Sarah. "However, your response was extremely efficient. The techniques you use suggest military training, not civilian self-defense." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she was calculating options. The officer was smart enough to see past her cover story. "I took self-defense courses before leaving Earth," she said, her tone remaining calm. "Freight haulers who work independent routes need to know how to protect themselves. There are dangerous areas in every port." It was a reasonable explanation. Almost believable. The Centauri officer studied her for a long moment, then looked down at his scanning device. His antennae suddenly shot upright in surprise. "Your identification has a security flag," he said slowly, his tone changing from annoyed to cautious. "A classified level flag that requires me to report this incident to Station Command immediately." Sarah's heart rate increased by exactly 5 beats per minute, noticeable to her, but not enough to show in her expression. This was the complication she had been dreading. Kruvax laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the silent bar. "Criminal," he declared triumphantly. "Human criminal with false identity. Arrest her now." But the security officer wasn't laughing. He was looking at Sarah with new understanding, realizing that whatever she was definitely not a simple freight hauler. "Everyone involved in this incident will come to the security station for processing," the Centauri said formally. "Now." Station Commander Velreth stared at the classified flag on his screen with growing concern. He was Korthan, a species known for administrative excellence and careful adherence to regulations. In his 20 years managing security for Epsilon 7, he had never seen a flag quite like this one. The human female's identification checked out perfectly on the surface. Sarah Chun, freight hauler, all permits and licenses current. But the moment his security officer had run her biometrics through the standard check, the system had flagged her file and immediately sent an alert to Coalition military intelligence. Now, Velroth was looking at a screen that told him absolutely nothing except that Sarah Chun was important to someone very powerful. And that information about her was classified far above his security clearance. He didn't like unknowns. The security station's holding area wasn't a jail exactly, more of a processing center where people involved in incidents were kept separate while investigations proceeded. Sarah sat in one room, her posture relaxed, but her eyes alert. Kruvax and his squadron were in another, getting increasingly agitated as they sobered up and realized the political complications of their situation. Veloth reviewed the bar's security footage for the 3rd time. The recording confirmed what the witnesses had stated. Kruvax had initiated contact, had grabbed Sarah with clear aggressive intent, had attempted to remove her from the public area. Her response had been proportional under Coalition self-defense statutes, but it was the way she moved that kept drawing Velreth's attention. Frame by frame, he could see the precision of her strikes, the way she had exploited specific vulnerabilities in Draxian physiology, the tactical awareness that kept her positioned optimally throughout the encounter. No civilian moved like that. No civilian. New pressure points that were classified military information. His office door chimed, and the authorized entry, a Draxian officer, entered. his scales marked with the insignia of a war leader, equivalent to a colonel in human terms. This was Thaxiran, the commanding officer of the military unit stationed on Epsilon 7, Commander Velrath. Thaxiran said formally, his voice a deep rumble. I am here regarding the incident involving one of my soldiers. I understand he's been detained. Velrath gestured to a chair. Though the Draxian remained standing, war leader Thaxiran, your soldier Kruvax assaulted a human female in violation of coalition law, Velrath said. Keeping his tone neutral, multiple witnesses confirm this. There is clear footage. Thaxiran's scales rippled with what might have been embarrassment or anger. The Corthan administrator couldn't quite tell. I have reviewed the footage you transmitted, the war leader admitted. Kruvax's behavior was dishonorable. He brought shame to his unit and to the Draxian military. This was surprisingly reasonable. Velrath had expected the war leader to defend his soldier regardless of evidence. However, Thaxiran continued, his tone hardening. The human female disabled a trained Draxian warrior with techniques that suggest advanced military instruction. Her identification claims she is a civilian freight hauler. Yet she fights like a special operations soldier. I have noticed the same inconsistency, Velrath admitted. Her file has been flagged by coalition military intelligence, but all details are classified above my access level. Before Thaxiran could respond, Velrath's communication panel lit up with an urgent priority signal, the kind that meant someone very important was demanding immediate attention. He authorized the connection, and a human male's face appeared on his screen. The human wore a military uniform with minimal insignia, but his bearing screamed authority. Commander Velrath. I am Commander Marcus Webb of Human Special Operations Command, the man said without preamble. I understand you are currently holding Captain Sarah Chanai. Need her released into my custody immediately. Velrath's antennae twitched with surprise, Captain. So the freight hauler story was indeed a cover. Commander Webb, with respect. Captain Chen is involved in an incident that requires investigation, Velrath said carefully. A Draxian soldier has filed charges of assault. Webb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold. The Draxian soldier committed sexual assault on an undercover military operative, Webb said flatly. Captain Chun showed remarkable restraint in not killing him. She is trained to eliminate threats permanently. And she chose not to, Thaxiran, who had moved to see the screen, made a sound deep in his throat. Undercover operative, Velrath repeated slowly. On my station investigating what exactly? That's classified, Webb said. But I can tell you that Captain Chun has been operating under deep cover for 6 months. And this incident has potentially compromised a major operation. Velrath felt the situation slipping out of his control. Before he could formulate a response, Webb continued. I'm currently en route to Epsilon 7 with a small support team, he said. We'll be docking in approximately 2 hours. I expect Captain Chun to be available for immediate departure at that time. The connection terminated before Velrath could respond. Corthan administrator looked at Thaxiran, who seemed equally disturbed by this development. A human special operations soldier on Epsilon 7 for 6 months, the war leader said slowly. Investigating something significant enough to warrant deep cover. This is troubling. War leader, I must ask, does Kruvax have any connections that might explain why he specifically targeted Captain Chun? Velrath asked. Thaxiran's scales rippled again, and this time Velrath recognized the emotion suspicion. I will interrogate him personally, the Draxian officer said, turning toward the door. If he has brought dishonor through more than simple drunken aggression, he will face our justice. After the war leader left, Velrath pulled up Sarah Chen's file again, this time searching for patterns in her activity over the past 6 months. What he found was interesting. She had frequented certain areas of the station more than others. had made deliveries to specific docking bays with suspicious regularity, had been present during several cargo transfers that had later been flagged for irregularities. She had been investigating something on his station, right under his nose, and he hadn't noticed. The thought was both humbling and concerning. He authorized a deeper search, requesting records of all cargo movements through the bay Sarah had frequented. What came back made his blood run cold. Someone with high-level access had been manipulating cargo manifests, covering up unauthorized shipments, moving weapons and military equipment through channels that should have been secure. The trail was sophisticated, designed to be invisible to normal security sweeps, but looking at it now with fresh eyes, knowing that a human special operations officer had been investigating, the pattern became clear. Weapons were being smuggled through Epsilon 7 to insurgent groups operating in the outer territories, and the person covering it up had access to military logistics systems. Velethus' hands moved quickly across his console, trying to identify who had the necessary clearances. The list was short. Only 5 individuals on the station had that level of access. He was one of them. Thaxron was another. Other 3 were coalition military officers assigned to the station's Logistics Coordination Center. One of them was the traitor, and if Captain Chun had been getting close to identifying them, then the incident with Kruvak suddenly looked less like a random drunken assault and more like an attempt to blow her cover or eliminate her entirely. This communicator chimed again. This time, it was his own security officer, the Zentari, who had responded to the bar incident. Commander, we have a situation, the officer said, his translator making his clicking speech sound urgent. Captain Chun is requesting to speak with you privately. She says she has information about a security threat to the station. Bring her to my office, Valrath said, and make sure no one else knows about this conversation. While he waited, Valrath locked down his office systems and activated privacy protocols. If there was a traitor with high-level access, he needed to be very careful about who he trusted. When Sarah Chun entered his office, she looked exactly like she had in the bar, tired, unremarkable, wearing the clothes of a freight hauler. But now Valrath could see past the disguise to the soldier underneath. Captain Chun, he said formally. Or should I say freight hauler Sarah? Sarah's expression remained neutral. Commander Valrath, my cover has been compromised, she said, getting straight to business. But before I leave this station, you need to know that someone in your command structure is running a weapons smuggling operation. Someone with access to military logistics systems. Valrath gestured to his screen. I have already begun to see the pattern, he admitted. 3 officers with the necessary clearances remain on my suspect list. Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. It's not you. I've cleared you already, she said. And it's not War Leader Thaxaren, despite what I initially suspected. Then who? Valrath demanded. Sarah's expression grew grim. I don't have definitive proof yet, she admitted. But I'm close. The shipment schedules suggest a major transfer happening within the next 48 hours. If we can intercept it, we'll catch them in the act. Commander Marcus Webb arrived at Epsilon 7 with the kind of efficiency that suggested he had made this type of emergency extraction before. He brought 3 other operatives with him, all human, all wearing civilian clothes that fooled absolutely no one who knew what to look for. Valrath met them at the docking bay. His security detail flanking him. Webb was shorter than most humans Valrath had encountered, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had survived situations where size didn't matter. Commander Valrath, Webb said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. Thank you for cooperating with this situation. Valrath accepted the handshake, noting the calluses that spoke of weapons training and hard use. Captain Chen has been briefing me on her investigation, the Corthon administrator said carefully. It appears we have a significant security problem on this station. Webb's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He was reassessing Velrath, deciding how much to trust him. "Walk with me," Webb said. "We need to have a conversation about what Captain Chun has actually been doing here." They moved to a private conference room. Security protocols activated. Webb's 3 operatives positioned themselves at strategic points, not overtly threatening, but making it clear they were protecting their commander. 6 months ago, Coalition intelligence identified a pattern in weapon shipments. Webb began. Military-grade equipment was disappearing from supply chains and showing up in the hands of insurgent groups in the outer territories. Velrath listened intently, his administrative mind already connecting pieces. The investigation traced the smuggling route back to 3 possible stations. Webb continued. Epsilon 7 was the most likely hub based on traffic patterns and cargo volume. "So you sent Captain Chun undercover as a freight hauler?" Velrath finished. Webb nodded. "Sarah Chun is one of our best," he said, and there was clear respect in his voice. "She served in human special operations for 8 years, 3 classified missions before this one. All successful." He pulled up a holographic display that showed Sarah's military record, or at least the parts that weren't redacted. Velrath saw commendations, mission reports with most details blacked out, and a service record that included specialized training in xenobiology, multi-species combat tactics, and deep cover operations. "The incident with Kruvax," Webb said, his tone hardening. "That wasn't random. I had begun to suspect as much." Velrath admitted. Webb pulled up another file, this one. Kruvax's financial records. "The Draxian soldier has been receiving payments from an untraceable account." Webb explained. "Small amounts, easy to miss, but consistent over the past 3 months. He was paid to target Captain Chun," Velrath said. "The pieces falling into place, either to blow her cover or to test her," Webb agreed. Someone suspected she wasn't what she appeared to, but they wanted confirmation. Velrath felt anger building in his thorax. Someone had turned his station into a criminal operation, had used his security systems to facilitate weapon smuggling, had compromised the safety of everyone who lived and worked here. "I want to help you catch them," he said firmly. Webb studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "But we do this my way. Captain Chun has spent 6 months building this case, and I'm not letting some administrator's need for proper procedure ruin it." Before Velrath could respond, the conference room door opened and Sarah Chun entered, followed by War Leader Thaxeronth. Draxian officer looked furious. "Kruvax has confessed," Thaxeron announced, his voice like grinding stone. "He was paid to provoke the human, to force a reaction that would either expose her as military or eliminate her as a threat." "By whom?" Webb demanded. Thaxeron's scales rippled with barely controlled rage. "He doesn't know the individual's identity," the war leader admitted. "All contact was through encrypted messages and anonymous payments, but he was told that a human freight hauler was asking too many questions about cargo shipments." Sarah spoke for the first time since entering. "That confirms my timeline," she said, her voice calm and professional. 3 weeks ago, I made inquiries about a shipment that later turned out to be flagged as suspicious. Someone noticed and started planning." Webb turned to her. "Show them what you found." Sarah activated the room's display system and brought up a complex web of data cargo manifests. Payment records, communication logs, all interconnected. "The smuggling operation is sophisticated," she explained, using the display like a tactical briefing. "Weapons are broken down into component parts and shipped through legitimate channels under false classifications." Velrath saw his station's security systems exposed as inadequate. The smugglers had exploited every loophole, every gap in oversight. "The components are assembled at a facility in the lower cargo levels," Sarah continued, "then shipped out on vessels with falsified documentation. Who has access to falsified documentation at that level? Thaxiran demanded. Sarah's expression was grim. Only 3 people on this station have the necessary clearances. Colonel Vexstar of Logistics Coordination, Captain Shenry of Supply Management, and Major Corton of Transportation Security. Valrath knew all 3 officers, had worked with them for years. The thought that one of them was a traitor was difficult to accept. I've been narrowing down the suspect list, Sarah said. And I believe I know which one it is, but I need to catch them in the act of proof that will stand up to Coalition military tribunal standards. Webb leaned forward. What's your plan? Sarah manipulated the display, showing a cargo bay schedule. There's a major shipment scheduled for 48 hours from now, she explained. It's larger than usual, probably a rush job because they know I've been getting close. You want to intercept it, Thaxiran said. More than that, Sarah replied. I want to be there when the traitor arrives to oversee the shipment. Personally, they've stayed hands-off for most operations. But something this large and this risky, they'll want direct control. Webb nodded approvingly. It's a good plan, high risk. But good. Valrath's administrative mind was already working through the logistics. We'll need a team we can trust absolutely, he said. If the traitor has compromised my security systems, we can't use standard channels. Agreed, Thaxiran rumbled. I will personally select a squad of my most loyal warriors, ones I know cannot be corrupted. Webb gestured to his 3 operatives. My team is trained for exactly this kind of operation, he said. We'll coordinate with your people. Sarah was pulling up schematics of the cargo bay in question. The facility has multiple access points, she said. Thinking aloud, we'll need to cover all exits. If they realize we're coming, they'll try to purge evidence. For the next 2 hours, they planted. Valath watched in fascination as Sarah Chen transformed from the tired freight hauler he had seen in the bar to the tactical specialist she really was. She identified weaknesses in the cargo bay's layout, suggested positioning for the assault team, calculated timing based on standard loading procedures. Webb provided intelligence support, pulling up files on the suspected officers, analyzing their patterns and likely response. Thaxiran contributed his warriors' capabilities, explaining what Draxian soldiers could do in close quarters combat. Was a multi-species operation, each group bringing their unique strengths to the plan. Finally, Webb looked at Sarah. You've been undercover for 6 months, he said. You've been alone, maintaining a false identity, gathering intelligence without support. That takes a toll. Sarah met his eyes steadily. I'm fine to see this through, she said. Webb studied her face. I know you are, he said quietly. But after this, you're taking leave. That's an order. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Understood, sir. Valrath noticed the exchange, the clear respect and concern Webb had for his operative. The trust Sarah had in her commander. It reminded him that behind the tactical planning and military precision, these were people who relied on each other, who cared about each other's well-being. Thaxiran spoke up, his voice thoughtful. Captain Chun, I must apologize on behalf of the Draxian military for Kruvak's actions, he said formally. What he did was dishonorable. He violated not only coalition law but our own codes of conduct. Sarah looked at the massive war leader. I appreciate the apology, she said, and I harbor no ill will toward the Draxian people. I fought alongside Draxian soldiers before, and I know that Kruvak's behavior doesn't represent your species. Thaxiran's scales rippled in what might have been relief or respect. When this operation concludes, he said, I would like to invite you to address my unit. They should hear from a human warrior about true strength. Sarah smiled slightly. I'd be honored. Webb checked his chronometer. We have 46 hours until the shipment, he said. Everyone get some rest. This is going to be complicated. And we need to be sharp. As they prepared to disperse, Valrath pulled Sarah aside. Captain Chun, may I ask you something? Sarah nodded. In the bar, when Kruvax grabbed you, you could have killed him in that first second, couldn't you? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Yes, she admitted. Draxian physiology has several lethal vulnerabilities. I'm trained to exploit them, but you didn't. Valrath said, no. Sarah agreed. Because killing should always be the last resort. I used the minimum force necessary to stop the threat and protect myself. Valrath's respect for the human operative increased significantly. She had the skill to kill, the training to do it efficiently, but the discipline to choose. The cargo bay was massive, designed to handle the largest transport vessels that docked at Epsilon 7. Sarah Chung crouched in the shadows of a storage container. Her breath steady, her mind calm. She had been in position for 3 hours, waiting with the patience that came from years of special operations training around her. Hidden in carefully selected positions were the other members of the Operation Team. Webb and his 3 operatives controlled the main entrance, Thaxeron, and 5 of his most trusted warriors covered the loading dock. Exesveloth monitored from the security center, having temporarily isolated this section of the station's surveillance grid to prevent the traitor from seeing their preparations. The shipment had arrived on Schedule 15. Containers marked as standard industrial equipment. Sarah had watched the loading crew bring them in, noting how carefully they handled the supposedly mundane cargo. Now they waited for the person who would come to oversee the final transfer. Sarah's earpiece crackled with Webb's voice. Movement. On the main entrance, single individual. Coalition military uniform. Sarah's heart rate remained steady, but her focus sharpened. This was it through a gap between containers. She saw the figure enter even from this distance. She recognized the bearing, the insignia. Colonel Vextar, head of logistics coordination. She had suspected him for weeks, but hadn't been able to prove it. The colonel was Virathania tall, slender species known for their analytical minds and bureaucratic excellence. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he had thought of everything, planned for every contingency. He approached the containers, pulling out a scanning device. Sarah watched as he inspected each one, verifying contents, checking seals. He was thorough, professional, completely unaware that 24 pairs of eyes were tracking his every movement. Vextar's communicator beeped, and he answered it. Status? He said in Coalition Common. Sarah couldn't hear the response, but she saw Vextar's body language shift: tension, concern. What do you mean the payment hasn't cleared? He demanded, his voice rising slightly. I authorized the transfer yesterday. Another pause. No. Don't contact them through normal channels. Use the backup protocol, Vextar said. Looking around the cargo bay nervously, Sarah caught Webb's eye from across the space-time to move. She activated her communicator. All teams. The target has confirmed his identity through zone communications. Prepare to close in on my signal. Vextar was still talking on his communicator. His back to Sarah's position, she moved silently from her hiding spot, covering the distance with the smooth efficiency of a predator. The other team members began to emerge from their positions, creating a perimeter that cut off all exits. Vextar finally noticed the movement. He spun around, his scanning device falling from his hands as he saw the armed humans and Draxians surrounding him. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, but his voice betrayed his fear. Sarah stepped into the light. No longer dressed as a freight hauler, she wore tactical gear now, with the insignia of Human Special Operations clearly visible. Colonel Vextar, she said formally, you are under arrest for weapons smuggling, conspiracy to supply insurgent forces, corruption of coalition military systems, and treason. Vextar's expression cycled through shock, calculation, and finally desperate defiance. This is absurd, he said, drawing himself up. I am a colonel in the coalition military. You have no authority to arrest me. Webb emerged from the shadows. I'm Commander Marcus Webb. Human Special Operations Command, he said. And under Coalition Military Justice Code, I have full authority to detain any officer suspected of treason, regardless of rank. Thaxeron's massive form moved into view, his scales bristling with barely contained anger. You have brought dishonor to the Coalition, the war leader growled. You have armed our enemies, caused the deaths of soldiers, including some of my own warriors. Vextar's defiance crumbled. He reached for something at his belt. Sarah saw the movement and reacted instantly. She crossed the distance in 3 strides, her hand intercepting his before he could draw whatever weapon or device he was reaching for. With a quick twist, she had his arm secured behind his back, forcing him to his knees. Don't make this worse, she said quietly. Vextar struggled for a moment, then went still. You don't understand, he said, his voice bitter. The Coalition is failing. The outer territories are in chaos, and the central government does nothing. I was trying to create balance by arming terrorists, Sarah said, her voice hard. By facilitating attacks that killed civilians and soldiers alike? By ensuring that no single faction became too powerful, Vextar insisted. Someone had to think strategically about the long-term stability of the region. Webb moved closer. That's not your decision to make, he said coldly. You don't get to play God with people's lives. Thaxeron's warriors moved in with restraints specifically designed for Varathani physiology as they secured the colonel. Volrath's voice came through the team communicators. I have full access to his systems now, the station commander said. He had multiple backup protocols, encrypted files, hidden accounts. It's going to take weeks to unravel all of this. Sarah looked at the 15 containers. We need to secure these weapons, she said, and trace where they were supposed to go. There might be more people involved. Webb nodded. My team will handle the forensic analysis, he said. Then looked at Sarah. You've done your part more than your part. Over the next hours, the operation expanded. Veloth's security forces locked down the cargo base. Webb's specialists began cataloging the weapons, enough firepower to equip a small army. All of it stolen from Coalition stockpiles and destined for insurgent groups. Thaxeron personally interrogated Vextar, using techniques that were aggressive but remained within Coalition regulations. The Colonel eventually provided additional information, names of contacts, details of other smuggling routes, evidence of a wider network. It was a major victory. But Sarah knew it was just one piece of a larger puzzle as dawn broke over Epsilon 7's artificial day cycle. Sarah found herself back in the same bar where the incident with his Kruvax had started. The place looked different in the early morning light. Cleaner, less threatening. Webb joined her at the bar, ordering drinks for both of them. 6 months is a long time to be undercover, he said quietly. How are you really doing? Sarah considered the question. Tired, she admitted. It's exhausting maintaining a false identity that long. Every conversation is a performance. Every interaction is calculated. That's why I'm ordering you to take a month of leave, Webb said firmly. No arguments, Sarah smiled slightly. Yes, sir. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. What you did with Kruvax, Webb said, that showed real discipline. A lot of operatives would have gone lethal immediately. He was drunk and stupid, Sarah said. Not an actual threat, just someone who needed to be stopped. The Draxians don't see it that way, Webb said. Thaxeron has been talking about you to his warriors. They're calling you the human who showed mercy to a warrior who deserved none. Sarah looked uncomfortable. I just did what training dictated. No, Webb corrected. Training dictated neutralizing the threat. You chose to do it in a way that preserved life and dignity where possible. That's something beyond training. The bar's entrance opened, and Thaxeron entered. Having to duck through the doorway, massive Draxian approached their table. Captain Chun, he said formally. Commander Webb, I wanted to inform you that Kruvax has been discharged from the military and will face civilian charges for his actions. Sarah nodded. That's appropriate. Thaxaron's scales shifted color slightly. He also asked me to convey something to you, the war leader said, seeming uncomfortable. He says that in his moment of greatest humiliation, you showed him what true strength looks like, not domination, but restraint. I hope he learned from it. Sarah said simply. Thaxaron studied her for a long moment. My warriors have asked if you would be willing to conduct a training session, he said. They want to learn human combat techniques. Sarah glanced at Webb, who nodded permission. I'd be happy to, she said, after I get some sleep over the next days. Word of what had happened spread through Epsilon 7. The story grew with each telling. The human woman who had taken down a Draxian warrior, who had spent 6 months undercover investigating a massive smuggling ring, who had brought down a corrupt officer. Sarah noticed the change in how people looked at her, where before she had been just another human, small, weak, unremarkable. Now she commanded respect, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Velrath called her to his office one final time before she left the station. Captain Chun, I wanted to thank you personally, he said, his antennae expressing genuine gratitude. You have made Epsilon 7 safer, not just by stopping the smuggling, but by showing that different species can work together effectively. Sarah smiled. That's what the coalition is supposed to be about, she said. Different strengths working toward common goals. Indeed, Velrath agreed, then hesitated. I must admit, when I first learned you were human, I had doubts. My species has certain assumptions about humans being relatively new to the galactic community. We are new, Sarah acknowledged. We've only been part of the coalition for 15 years. But in that time, Velrath continued, your species has proven that strength comes in many forms, not just physical power, but intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to do what is right, even when it is difficult. Sarah felt genuinely